The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Bragg training compound as Sergeant Maya Chen stepped out of the transport vehicle, her worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The North Carolina heat was already building, promising another scorching day of what she knew would be intense scrutiny. Around her, the Delta Force compound buzzed with the controlled energy of elite operators, preparing for another day of training that would break lesser soldiers. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. She'd been here before, not to this specific compound, but to places like it. Places where men looked at her 5 feet 4 inches frame and wondered if there'd been some kind of administrative error. Places where her gender preceded her reputation, where whispers followed her footsteps, and where she'd learned to let her rifle do the talking. "You lost, sweetheart?" The voice came from behind her, dripping with the kind of condescension she'd grown accustomed to over her 8 years in the military. Maya turned slowly, taking in the speaker, a mountain of a man with sergeant's stripes, probably 6'4", and built like he'd been carved from granite. His name tape read Morrison, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sergeant Chen, reporting." "For advanced marksmanship integration," she replied evenly, pulling her orders from her cargo pocket. "Unless you know of another Delta compound around here." Morrison's smile widened as he glanced at the papers, then handed them back. "Advanced marksmanship, huh? Well, I'll be damned, boys." He called out to a cluster of operators near the main building. "Come meet our new sharpshooter." Maya felt the familiar weight of assumption settling around her as 5 more Delta operators approached. She recognized the type immediately, all muscle and confidence. The kind of men who'd never met a challenge they couldn't dominate through sheer force of will. They moved with the casual arrogance of apex predators in their own territory. "This is Sergeant Chen," Morrison announced, making her name sound like a punchline waiting to happen. "She's here to teach us something about shooting." The tallest of the group, whose name tape identified him as Rodriguez, let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be." Didn't know they were sending in the varsity squad from the typing pool. A round of chuckles followed. Maya had heard variations of this joke in a dozen different training grounds. She shouldered her bag and met Rodriguez's gaze directly. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, reading his rank. "With respect, sir, I'm here on Colonel Hartwell's direct orders. Advanced marksmanship integration, 2-week rotation. I believe my credentials were sent ahead." "Oh, we saw your credentials," said another operator, this one stockier with arms like tree trunks. His name tape read Campbell, impressive paper trail. "Sniper school honor graduate, multiple combat deployments, bunch of medals. Question is, can you actually shoot, or did you just interview real well?" Maya felt the heat rising in her cheeks but kept her voice level. "I suppose we'll find out during training, Sergeant Campbell." "I suppose we will," Morrison interjected, clapping his hands together. "Tell you what, Chun, how about we skip the formal introductions and get right to the meat of it? Boys have been working on some long-range challenges this week. Maybe you'd like to show us what all that fancy training bought the taxpayers." The group began moving toward the range complex, and Maya found herself swept along in their wake. She could feel their eyes on her, measuring, judging, already writing her off. It was a familiar dance, one she'd performed at every new assignment. The only difference was that these men were among the most elite soldiers on the planet, and their dismissal carried more weight than the usual garrison troops. The range complex was impressive, multiple firing positions, stretching out over carefully maintained terrain that included everything from close quarters battle houses to extreme long-range shooting lanes. Maya could see targets placed at distances that would challenge even experienced snipers, and her fingers itched to get her hands on her rifle. "So, Chun," Rodriguez said as they walked, "where'd you learn to shoot? Daddy take you hunting on weekends?" "Actually," Maya replied, stepping carefully around the obvious trap, "I learned on my grandmother's farm in Montana." She taught me that if you're going to kill something, you better make it count the first time. Wasting ammunition was disrespectful to both the prey and the weapon. Grandma, huh? Campbell grinned. What did you hunt? Squirrels? Prairie dogs? Elk, mostly. Some deer. The occasional coyote when they got too close to the livestock. Maya paused. At ranges that would make your head spin, Sergeant. The comment drew more chuckles, but she noticed they were slightly less dismissive now. Morrison led them to an elevated position overlooking the main range, where several high-end rifles were laid out on shooting mats. Maya recognized the setup immediately: Barrett M82, A1 South, Chaytak M200s, and a few custom builds that probably cost more than her annual salary. "All right, Chen," Morrison said, gesturing toward the weapons. "Pick your poison. We've got targets set up at various ranges. Start wherever you feel comfortable." Maya scanned the available rifles, then looked out at the range. She could see targets at 500 meters, 800 meters, 1,200 meters, and what looked like several placed at extreme range, probably 2,000 meters or more. The wind was relatively calm, maybe 3 to 5 knots from the southwest, and the morning light was excellent for long-range work. "What's the furthest target you have set up?" she asked. Rodriguez raised an eyebrows. "We've got steel out at 2,800 meters. That far enough for Grandma's little girl?" "It's a start," Maya replied, causing a few surprised looks. She knelt beside the custom Chaytak, running her hands over the weapon with the familiarity of someone who'd spent years behind similar rifles. "What's the load data on this one?" "Factory 408 Chaytak, 419 grain bullets," said a new voice. Maya looked up to see an older operator approaching, probably in his 40s, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen serious combat. His name. Tape read Wilson, and unlike the others, he wasn't smiling. "Rifles zeroed at 100 meters. DOP charts in the book there." Maya nodded her thanks and began her pre-shot routine, checking the weapon's condition, verifying the scope settings, and familiarizing herself with the trigger. The other operators watched with interest as she worked. Her movements were precise, methodical, professional. "So, Chen," Morrison said, settling in beside her with a spotting scope, "before you start slinging lead at our targets, maybe you could tell us a little about your background. Where'd you serve? What kind of shooting did you do?" Maya continued her weapon inspection as she spoke. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Designated marksman first, then sniper school, then attached to various special operations units. Longest confirmed kill was at 1,847 meters. Taliban commander in the Chronicles Valley. The casual mention of the Chronicles, one of the most dangerous valleys in Afghanistan, caused a slight shift in the group's demeanor. These men had all heard stories from that particular corner of hell. "Chronicles, huh?" Wilson said quietly. "When were you there?" 2018 to 2019, Maya replied, finally satisfied with the rifle's condition. "Spent 8 months attached to 3rd Group." "Good times," Rodriguez let out a low whistle. 3-7 was in some serious shit that year. Lost a lot of good men. "Yes, they did." Maya's voice carried a weight that silenced the group momentarily. "I was there to make sure they lost fewer than they might have otherwise." She settled into her shooting position, adjusting the rifle's bipod and getting comfortable behind the scope. Through the optics, she could see the steel target at 2,800 meters, a small silhouette that would be invisible to the naked eye. The morning conditions were excellent, but at that range, even perfect shooting could be defeated by minute changes in wind or atmospheric pressure. "All right, Chen," Morrison said, his tone slightly more respectful now. "Let's see what you've got. Target's a 12-inch square, 2,800 meters. Take your time, get comfortable." Maya began her range estimation and environmental analysis, factoring in temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wind conditions. She consulted the dope book, made her scope adjustments, and settled into her final firing position. Through the scope, she could see the target clearly now, a small steel square that would ring like a bell if struck. "Spotter ready?" she asked. "Ready," Morrison replied, his eye pressed to the spotting scope. "Send it when ready." Maya controlled her breathing, finding her natural respiratory pause. Her finger found the trigger's sweet spot, and she began her squeeze slow, steady, straight back. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a thunderous crack that echoed across the range. "Miss," Morrison called out after several seconds. "Low and left, maybe 2 feet." Maya absorbed the information, made a small adjustment to her scope, and chambered another round. The second shot followed the same methodical process: breathing, trigger squeeze, follow through. "Hit!" Morrison's voice carried genuine surprise. "Right center mass. Nice correction." Maya cleared the rifle and sat back on her heels, ignoring the surprised looks from the other operators. A hit at 2,800 meters was impressive by any standard, but what had really caught their attention was the speed of her correction. Most shooters would have needed several more rounds to dial in their solution. "Lucky shot?" Campbell asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really believe it. "Let's find out," Rodriguez said, pointing toward an even more distant target. "We've got steel at 3,000 meters. Think Grandma taught you to reach out." "That far?" Maya looked where he was pointing and could just make out a small glint of metal in the distance. 3,000 meters, nearly 2 miles. At that range, gravity would drop the bullet over 900 feet, and even a slight breeze could push the projectile completely off target. It was a shot that challenged the limits of both equipment and human skill. "What's the target size?" she asked. 12-inch. "Square, same as the last one," Wilson replied. "Though I should mention, nobody's hit it yet. We've been working that range for 3 weeks, and the best we've managed is close misses." Maya studied the distant target through the spotting scope, noting the terrain features and trying to read the wind conditions across the nearly 2-mile span. At that distance, she'd be shooting through multiple wind zones, each potentially affecting the bullet's flight path differently. "Interesting challenge," she said finally. "Mind if I take a few shots at it?" "Be our guest," Morrison replied. "But just so you know, we've had some serious shooters try that target, including a few guys with confirmed kills over 2,000 meters. Steel's still virgin." Maya nodded and returned to her shooting position, this time taking even more care with her calculations. 3,000 meters was at the ragged edge of what was possible with current technology and perfect conditions. She'd never attempted a shot at that range in combat. Few people had, and fewer still had succeeded. She spent nearly 10 minutes analyzing conditions, checking and double-checking her math, and making microscopic adjustments to her scope. The other operators watched in silence, their earlier mockery replaced by professional interest. This was the kind of shooting that separated true masters from merely competent marksmen. "Spotter ready?" Maya asked. "Ready," Morrison confirmed. "Winds?" "Picked up slightly, maybe 5 knots from the southwest." Maya nodded, absorbed the information, and settled into her final firing position. At 3,000 meters, the bullet would take over 4 seconds to reach the target, an eternity in ballistic terms. Any number of factors could affect the shot during that time. She found her breathing rhythm, located her natural pause, and began her trigger squeeze. The rifle roared, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended in anticipation. 4.5 seconds passed in absolute silence. Then, faintly but unmistakably, came the metallic ping of a bullet striking steel. "Holy shit," Rodriguez breathed. "Did she just ... "Confirmed hit," Morrison called out, his voice filled with disbelief. "Dead center." "Jesus Christ, Chun, where the hell did that come from?" Maya cleared the rifle and sat back, trying to keep the satisfaction off her face. Around her, the Delta operators stared with a mixture of amazement and newfound respect. The casual dismissal was gone. replaced by the professional acknowledgement that they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. "Not bad for someone who can't hit water," she said quietly. The comment drew surprised laughter from the group, and Maya realized the dynamic had shifted fundamentally. She was no longer the outsider trying to prove herself. She was a peer who'd earned her place through demonstrated skill. "All right, Chen," Wilson said, extending his hand. "I think we owe you an apology. That was some serious shooting." Maya shook his hand, noting the genuine respect in his eyes. "No apology necessary, Sergeant. I've heard worse, and I'll probably hear worse again. The rifle doesn't care about hurt feelings." "True enough," Morrison agreed. "But it does care about skill, and you've got that in spades. Welcome to the team." As the group began to break up, Maya started cleaning the rifle she'd used, her movements automatic after years of practice. She could feel the change in atmosphere where before there had been skepticism and barely concealed hostility. Now there was curiosity and professional interest. "Chun," Rodriguez called out as he prepared to leave. "You free for dinner tonight? Team usually grabs food at O'Malley's off base. Might be nice to hear some of those chronicles stories." Maya looked up from her cleaning kit, surprised by the invitation. "Sure, sounds good. Outstanding. And Chun?" Rodriguez paused at the edge of the range. "For what it's worth, that was one hell of a shot. 3,000 meters, first attempt. I've seen a lot of good shooters, but that was something else." As the operators dispersed, Maya found herself alone with Wilson, who'd remained behind to help secure the equipment. The older sergeant worked in comfortable silence for several minutes before speaking. "You know," he said finally, "Morrison wasn't entirely wrong when he said we'd had some serious shooters try that target. Including me." Maya looked up from the rifle she was disassembling. "What's your background, Sergeant?" 22 years, multiple deployments, Scout Sniper School, various advanced courses." Wilson paused in his work. 3 confirmed kills over 1,500 meters, including one at 1,900 that I'm still pretty proud of." "That's solid shooting," Maya said, meaning it. "Thanks, but I've never even come close to what you just did. 3,000 meters, cold barrel, first attempt on a target you'd never seen before." Wilson shook his head. "That wasn't just good shooting, Chun. That was artistry." Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks at the praise. "I got lucky with the conditions. Wind was calm, temperature was stable." "Bullshit," Wilson said bluntly. "Luck doesn't account for the kind of precision I just watched. You did something that most snipers only dream about, and you made it look routine." He finished securing his equipment and stood. "Question is, what are you doing here? With skills like that, you could write your own ticket. Any unit in the military would take you in a heartbeat." Maya considered the question as she packed her gear. It was something she'd been asking herself for months, ever since the orders had come down for this assignment. "Honestly, I'm not sure." Colonel Hartwell said Delta was working on some new long-range protocols, and they needed someone with extreme distance experience. But after what just happened, she gestured toward the distant target. "I'm starting to think there might be more to it." Wilson nodded slowly. "Hartwell's a good officer. Doesn't waste people's time or talents. If he sent you here, there's a reason." He shouldered his gear bag. "My advice? Keep your eyes open and your mouth shut. Delta doesn't do anything by accident, and bringing in someone with your skills suggests they've got something big in mind." As Wilson walked away, Maya finished packing her equipment and considered his words. The 3,000-meter shot had been impressive, but it was also just the beginning. Whatever Colonel Hartwell had planned for her, she had a feeling the morning's demonstration was merely an audition. 3 days later, Maya found herself in a different kind of briefing room, surrounded by maps, satellite imagery, and tactical displays that spoke of operations far beyond the training compound. Colonel Hartwell stood at the front of the room, his weathered face bearing the expression of a man who'd spent decades making life-and-death decisions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hartwell began, his voice carrying the authority of command. "What you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels. Operation Silent Thunder has been in planning for 8 months, and we're now approaching the execution phase." Maya glanced around the room, noting the faces of the operators she'd met on the range, plus several others she didn't recognize. All wore the focused expression of professionals receiving critical intelligence. "Our target," Hartwell continued, activating a large display screen, is Hassan al-Rashid, a high-value individual who's been coordinating terrorist activities across 3 countries. "Intelligence indicates he'll be attending a meeting at this location." He pointed to a satellite image of a remote compound in the mountains of northern Afghanistan. The image showed a fortified position built into the side of a mountain, with multiple defensive positions and what appeared to be extensive underground facilities. Maya studied the terrain, automatically noting sight lines, potential shooting positions, and approaches. "The compound is heavily defended," Hartwell continued. "Approximately 50 armed fighters, multiple weapon emplacements, and sophisticated early warning systems. Direct assault would result in heavy casualties and likely allow the target to escape through tunnel systems we know exist, but haven't fully mapped." Morrison raised his hand. "What's the alternative approach, sir?" Hartwell smiled grimly. "That's where Sergeant Chin comes in." All eyes turned to Maya, who felt her stomach tighten with anticipation. "The compound has one critical vulnerability. It's built into the mountainside for protection, but that same geography creates a unique opportunity for a precision strike." The display changed to show a topographical map with elevation markers and range calculations. Maya's trained eye immediately picked out what Hartwell was describing, a series of high peaks that would provide clear sight lines to the target. "Compound at extreme range. The nearest viable shooting position," Hartwell said, "is located here." He pointed to a peak nearly 4 kilometers from the target, at an elevation of 3,200 meters, shooting down to a target at 2,100 meters elevation. Total horizontal distance, 3,847 meters. The room fell silent. Maya felt her mouth go dry as the implications sank in. 3,847 meters, nearly 2.5 miles, was beyond the accepted limits of precision rifle fire. The physics alone would be staggering. Bullet drop of over 1,100 feet, flight time approaching 6 seconds, and environmental factors that could multiply exponentially over that distance. "Sir," Rodriguez said carefully, "with respect, has anyone ever made a confirmed kill at that range?" "Not yet," Hartwell replied. "The current record stands at 3,540 meters, set by a Canadian sniper in Iraq. What we're proposing would exceed that by over 300 meters, under significantly more challenging conditions." Wilson leaned forward. "What kind of equipment are we talking about?" "Custom Chaytak M200, modified for extreme long-range work. Custom bullets, match-grade powder, precision-built ammunition. The weapon itself represents the absolute pinnacle of current sniper technology." Hartwell paused. "But technology is only as good as the person behind it." All eyes were on Maya now. She stared at the tactical display, her mind automatically running calculations. Wind drift at that range would be measured in dozens of feet. Temperature variations could cause point-of-impact shifts of several meters. The Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, would become a significant factor. "When?" she asked quietly. 72 hours, Hartwell replied. "Al-Rashid will be in the compound for approximately 6 hours, attending what intelligence suggests is a major planning meeting. We'll have a narrow window of opportunity when he's exposed on the compound's main balcony." Maya nodded slowly, still processing the magnitude of what was being asked. "Support? Full team insertion," Morrison answered. "We'll establish a secure perimeter around your shooting position and provide security while you work." Extraction will be by helicopter. Once the mission is complete, weather conditions? Hartwell activated another display showing meteorological data. Mountain weather, potentially unstable. Current forecasts show light winds, but that could change rapidly. Temperature variations between your position and the target could be significant. Maya studied the data, noting the challenges. Mountain shooting was always unpredictable thermals, wind shear, and rapidly changing conditions could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss in seconds. "I'll need 3 days to work up a firing solution," she said finally. "Custom ammunition, extensive ballistic testing, environmental modeling. And I'll need to practice at maximum range under similar conditions." "Done," Hartwell replied immediately. "We've arranged for you to use the Special Operations Range Complex in Colorado. Similar elevation, similar conditions, targets out to 4,000 meters. Campbell whistled low. 4,000 meters? Jesus! If Sergeant Chen can consistently hit targets at 4,000 meters in training, Hartwell explained, then 3,847 meters under operational conditions becomes achievable. Maya felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just another difficult shot. This was pushing the absolute boundaries of what was considered possible with small arms fire. The physics, the equipment, the human factors, everything would have to be perfect. "Sir," she said, "I need to be honest about the probability of success. At that range, under field conditions, even with perfect equipment and preparation, we're talking about maybe a 60% chance of a first round hit. That's assuming ideal conditions." "Understood," Hartwell replied. "But al-Rashid represents a clear and present danger to American lives. This meeting could result in coordinated attacks that kill hundreds of innocent people. The risk is acceptable." Maya nodded, recognizing the weight of command decisions. In her world, success was measured in precision and consistency. In Hartwell's world, it was measured in lives saved and threats eliminated. "I'll need to see the rifle," she said. "And I'll need detailed intelligence on the target area, but not just the compound, but the entire valley. Wind patterns, thermal behavior, everything that might affect bullet flight over that distance." "Already being prepared," Wilson interjected. "We've had surveillance assets monitoring the area for weeks. Full meteorological analysis, terrain mapping, even acoustic signatures to help predict environmental conditions." Rodriguez raised his hand. "What about backup plans? If Chen misses, or if conditions make the shot impossible?" Hartwell's expression grew grim. "Direct assault by the full team. Much higher casualty probability, lower chance of success, but it's what we have." He paused. "Which is why failure is not an option." The briefing continued for another hour, covering extraction procedures, communications protocols, and contingency plans. Maya absorbed the information while part of her mind continued running ballistic calculations. 3,847 meters. At that range, she'd be shooting at the very edge of what physics would allow. As the meeting broke up, Maya found herself walking with Wilson toward the armory where her custom rifle was waiting. "Nervous?" he asked. Maya considered the question. "Terrified," she admitted. "Not of the shot. I've been making difficult shots my entire career. But this," she gestured at the classified folders she was carrying, "this is different. This is making history, one way or another." "You'll make it," Wilson said confidently. "What you did on the range the other day, that wasn't luck. That was skill at a level most of us will never reach." They entered the armory, where a single rifle case sat on a steel table. Maya opened it carefully, revealing what was arguably the most advanced sniper rifle ever built. The Chetak M20 had been modified extensively, custom barrel, precision machined action, advanced scope systems, and modifications she couldn't immediately identify. "Beautiful," she murmured, lifting the rifle from its case. The weapon felt alive in her hands, perfectly balanced and engineered for a single purpose, delivering precise fire at impossible distances. Custom work by the best gunsmiths in the country, Wilson explained. Barrel life is limited, maybe 500 rounds before accuracy degrades. But for those 500 rounds, it'll shoot better than anything else on the planet. Maya ran her hands over the weapon, familiarizing herself with its weight and balance. In 3 days, this rifle would either make her the most accomplished sniper in military history, or it would simply be another expensive failure in the mountains of Afghanistan. "Wilson," she said quietly, "what do you really think, honestly?" The older sergeant was quiet for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that if anyone can make this shot, it's you. But I also think we're asking you to do something that might not be humanly possible." Maya nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Guess we'll find out." "Guess we will," Wilson agreed. "But Chen? For what it's worth, I'm glad you're the one taking the shot. If this works, it'll be because the best shooter any of us have ever seen made it work." The Colorado mountains rose around Maya like ancient sentinels, their snow-capped peaks piercing the crystalline blue sky that promised perfect shooting conditions. The Special Operations Training Facility sprawled across 50,000 acres of pristine wilderness, offering every conceivable environment for military training. For Maya, it represented 72 hours to accomplish what many would consider impossible, preparing to make the longest sniper shot in military history. She stood at the 4,000-meter firing position, a reinforced concrete platform built into the side of a mountain at 3,400 meters elevation. Before her stretched a valley that seemed to go on forever, with steel targets placed at precise intervals, marking distances that pushed the very limits of rifle technology. The morning air was thin and sharp, carrying the bite of altitude that reminded her constantly of the challenges ahead. "Ballistic computer shows 1,147 feet of drop," announced Dr. Sarah Martinez, the civilian ballistics expert who'd been assigned to help Maya work up her firing solutions. At this elevation, in these atmospheric conditions, with the custom 419-grain bullets we're using. Maya studied the readout on the tablet Martinez handed her, noting the dozens of variables that would affect her shot in Afghanistan. "What about the Coriolis effect?" At 3,847 meters, firing north to south, you're looking at approximately 18 inches of deflection to the right, Martinez replied. "But that's assuming perfect cardinal direction shooting. Your actual bearing in country will be northeast to southwest, which reduces the Coriolis effect to about 14 inches. The mathematics were staggering. At nearly 2.5 miles, the bullet would drop over 1,100 feet due to gravity. Earth's rotation would push it sideways by more than a foot. Wind, temperature variations, and atmospheric pressure changes could multiply these effects unpredictably. "Let's start with the 3,500-meter target," Maya said, settling into her shooting position behind the custom Chaytak. "Work our way up to maximum range." She'd been shooting for 2 days straight, methodically, working out the firing solutions for extreme distances. Her shooting log showed over 200 rounds fired, with groups that were impressive by any standard, but still not quite perfect enough for what lay ahead. At 3,500 meters, she was hitting a 12-inch target roughly 70% of the time. At 4,000 meters, that percentage dropped to about 40%. "Remember," Martinez said, settling in beside her with a spotting scope, "these conditions are as close to Afghanistan as we can simulate, but they're not exact. Mountain weather can change in minutes. What works here might not work there." Maya nodded, having learned that lesson the hard way during her previous deployments. Mountain shooting was as much art as science, requiring the ability to read conditions and adapt instantly to changing circumstances. She fired her first shot of the morning, watching through her scope as the bullet arced across the valley toward the distant target. 4.5 seconds later, she heard the faint ring of steel. "Hit center mass," Martinez called out. "Excellent shot." Maya chambered another round and fired again, maintaining the mechanical precision that had become second nature over thousands of practice shots. Another hit, this one slightly high but still within the target zone. "Your consistency is remarkable," Martinez observed. "I've worked with a lot of long-range shooters, and I've never seen anyone maintain this level of accuracy at extreme distances." "Consistency is everything in this business," Maya replied, cycling the bolt and preparing for another shot. "Perfect shots are nice, but consistent shots save lives." By midday, Maya had fired 40 rounds at the 3,500-meter target, with a hit rate of 85%. It was exceptional shooting by any standard, but she knew that in Afghanistan, with lives on the line and no second chances, 85% wouldn't be enough. "Let's move to 4,000 meters, she said, beginning the process of adjusting her scope for the longer range. The 4,000-meter target was barely visible even through high-powered optics, a small steel square that represented the absolute limit of what current technology could achieve. Maya had been working up to this distance gradually, learning the rifle's behavior at ranges that pushed both equipment and human capability. Her first shot at 4,000 meters was a miss, the bullet impacting low and left of the target. She made adjustments based on Martinez's spotting and fired again. Another miss, this one closer, but still not quite there. "Don't get frustrated," Martinez advised. "At this range, even world-class shooters miss more than they hit. The fact that you're getting close is remarkable." Maya took a deep breath, forcing herself to relax. Frustration was the enemy of precision, causing muscle tension and mental stress that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. She'd learned early in her career that the best shooters were those who could remain calm under pressure. Her third shot at 4,000 meters was a hit, the bullet striking the target with a satisfying ring that echoed across the valley. Maya allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction before chambering another round. "Outstanding," Martinez said. "What did you do differently?" "Trusted the rifle," Maya replied. "And trusted my training." Sometimes overthinking is worse than not thinking at all. The afternoon was spent refining her technique at maximum range, learning to read the subtle wind indicators and atmospheric conditions that could make or break an extreme distance shot. By evening, Maya's hit rate at 4,000 meters had improved to roughly 50%, still not perfect, but better than most shooters could achieve at half that distance. That evening, Maya sat in her quarters studying meteorological data from Afghanistan, trying to understand the environmental conditions she'd face in less than 48 hours. The target compound sat in a valley surrounded by peaks that would create complex wind patterns and thermal effects. Weather reports showed the possibility of changing conditions throughout the day. A knock at her door interrupted her studies. She opened it to find Wilson standing in the hallway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone with something important to say. "Thought you might need some caffeine," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Mind if I come in?" Maya stepped aside, welcoming the company. The past 2 days had been intensive and solitary, focused entirely on the technical aspects of extreme-range shooting. Human contact was a welcome break. "How's the preparation going?" Wilson asked, settling into a chair across from her desk. "Better than expected, but not as well as I'd hoped," Maya replied honestly. "At 4,000 meters, I'm hitting about half my shots under perfect conditions. The actual shot in Afghanistan will be shorter, but the conditions will be more challenging." Wilson nodded, understanding the complexities involved. "What's your biggest concern?" Maya pointed to the meteorological data spread across her desk. "Wind. At that range, a 5-knot crosswind can push the bullet 6 feet off target. The terrain around the compound will create unpredictable air currents that could change rapidly. What about backup plans?" If conditions make the shot impossible, then we go to direct assault, and a lot of good people probably die. Maya's voice was flat, but Wilson could hear the weight of responsibility in it. That's what makes this different from training. In training, a miss just means trying again. In Afghanistan, a miss means people die. Wilson was quiet for a moment, understanding the pressure Maya was under. "You know," he said finally, "when I first saw you on the range, making that 3,000-meter shot, I thought it was impossible. Now I know better. Sometimes impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been done yet." Maya looked up from her data. "You really think I can make this shot?" "I think," Wilson said carefully, "that if anyone in the world can make this shot, it's you. And I think that sometimes that's all we can ask for, to be the best we can be when it matters most." After Wilson left, Maya returned to her preparations, but his words stayed with her. Tomorrow she would fly to Afghanistan, where she would attempt something that had never been done before. The mathematics were staggering, the challenges enormous, and the consequences of failure severe. But for the first time since receiving her orders, Maya felt something other than apprehension. She felt ready. The CH-47 Chinook helicopter cut through the pre-dawn darkness over the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, its twin rotors beating a steady rhythm that vibrated through Maya's bones. She sat in the cargo bay surrounded by the Delta Force operators who would provide security for her mission, all of them checking and rechecking equipment with the methodical precision of professionals, heading into harm's way. Through the open rear ramp, Maya could see the landscape scrolling beneath them, jagged peaks and deep valleys carved by millennia of wind and weather. The terrain was unforgiving, the kind of country where a single misstep could mean death and where enemies had been fighting invaders for centuries. 10 minutes out, the crew chief announced over the intercom, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. Maya checked her equipment one final time. The custom CHATAC was secured in its case, along with 20 rounds of hand-loaded ammunition that represented the pinnacle of ballistic technology. Each bullet had been weighed to within 0.1 grains. Each case measured for perfect consistency. Each powder charge calculated to deliver maximum accuracy at extreme range. Morrison leaned over, shouting to be heard above the helicopter noise. "Remember, we establish the perimeter first, then you get to work. Take all the time you need to set up. We'll keep the bad guys away from you." Maya nodded, appreciating the confidence, but knowing that in these mountains, a determined enemy could appear from nowhere with little warning. The compound they were targeting was only 20 kilometers away, well within range of hostile forces that might investigate helicopter activity in the area. The Chinook began its descent toward their insertion point, a rocky plateau at 3,200 meters elevation that would serve as Maya's shooting position. Through night vision goggles, she could see the landing zone, a relatively flat area, surrounded by defensive positions that the advance team had prepared over the previous 48 hours. 30 seconds, the crew chief called out. The helicopter flared hard, its rotors clawing at the thin mountain air as it settled onto the rocky ground. Before the wheels had fully touched down, the Delta operators were moving, flowing out of the cargo bay with practiced efficiency and spreading out to establish security. Maya followed with her rifle case and equipment pack, feeling the immediate bite of high-altitude air and the silence that followed the helicopter's departure. Above them, stars blazed with the clarity only possible at extreme elevation, while below them lay valleys shrouded in darkness that could hide any number of threats. "Perimeter's secure," Rodriguez reported over the radio. "We've got eyes on all approaches, motion sensors deployed, and backup extraction planned if things go sideways." Maya began unpacking her equipment in the protected firing position that had been prepared for her, a reinforced position with overhead cover and clear sight lines toward the target compound. The advance team had done excellent work, creating A shooting platform that would allow her to work while remaining largely invisible to enemy observation. Target bearing 047 degrees, range 3,847 meters, Wilson reported, settling in beside her with a spotting scope and range-finding equipment. Compound is dark right now, but thermal imaging shows approximately 40 personnel inside the main building. Maya assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency, each component fitting together with the precision of a Swiss watch. The custom. Chaitak felt familiar in her hands now, after 3 days of intensive practice, but she knew that familiarity was no guarantee of success at this range. "What's the wind situation?" she asked, beginning her environmental assessment. Campbell, who had taken responsibility for meteorological monitoring, consulted his instruments. "Surface wind here is calm, maybe 2 knots from the northeast. But we're seeing some thermal activity in the valley that could affect bullet flight." Maya nodded, understanding the challenge. At 3,847 meters, her bullet would pass through multiple atmospheric layers, each potentially affecting its trajectory. Wind near her position might be calm, while conditions a kilometer away could be completely different. She spent the next hour setting up her equipment and running preliminary range calculations. The mathematics were as daunting as she remembered. 1,147 feet of bullet drop, 14 inches of wind drift from the Coriolis effect, and environmental factors that could change everything in seconds. "Movement in the compound," Rodriguez reported from his observation position. "Looks like they're starting to wake up." Still several hours before the target's scheduled arrival, Maya used the time to familiarize herself with the terrain, studying the valley through her scope and noting features that would help her judge wind conditions when the time came. She identified several flags and pieces of cloth that would serve as wind indicators, and noted the behavior of smoke from cooking fires that would help her read air currents. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose, Maya could see the target compound clearly for the first time. It was exactly as the intelligence photos had shown, a fortified position built into the mountainside, with the distinctive balcony where al-Rashid would make his appearance. "Compound's coming alive," Wilson observed, watching through his spotting scope. Guards changing, cooking fires being lit, vehicles moving around. "Looks like they're preparing for something big." Maya adjusted her scope settings for the changing light conditions, noting how the morning sun would affect visibility and heat shimmer. At extreme range, even subtle changes in atmospheric conditions could mean the difference between success and failure. "Chun," Morrison's voice came through the radio. "We've got satellite intelligence that al-Rashid's convoy is approaching the compound. Ada, approximately 3 hours." Maya acknowledged the transmission, feeling her heart rate increase slightly. After months of planning and days of preparation, the moment was approaching when everything would depend on a single shot fired across nearly 2.5 miles of mountain air. "How are you feeling?" Wilson asked quietly. Maya considered the question as she continued her preparations. "Ready," she said finally. "Scared, but ready." "Good," Wilson replied. "Scared keeps you sharp. Overconfident gets you killed." The next 2 hours passed slowly, with periodic reports of activity in the compound and updates on al-Rashid's approach. Maya used the time to continue refining her firing solution, taking into account the gradually changing environmental conditions as the sun climbed higher. At 0947 hours, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. Multiple vehicles approaching the compound from the southeast. "Looks like our boys arrived." Maya felt her pulse quicken as she pressed her eye to the scope, scanning the compound for signs of her target. Through the powerful optics, she could see figures moving around the main building, but at nearly 4 kilometers distance, individual identification was impossible. "Thermal imaging confirms multiple high-value individuals entering the main building," Campbell reported. "But we won't have positive identification until someone appears on the balcony." Maya settled into her final firing position, adjusting the rifle's bipod and getting comfortable behind the stock. Her breathing was controlled, her heart rate steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. This was what she'd trained for, the moment when years of preparation would be tested by a single shot. Movement on the balcony, Wilson announced. 2 individuals. Make that 3. Can't confirm identity yet. Maya swung her scope toward the balcony, a small platform that appeared no larger than a postage stamp at this distance. Through the powerful optics, she could see figures moving, but the range made positive identification challenging. "Wait," Wilson said, his voice tight with concentration. "Got him." Target confirmed on the balcony, wearing white robes, speaking to 2 other individuals. Range 3,847 meters, bearing unchanged. Maya found her target through the scope, a figure in flowing white robes who matched the photographs she'd studied for weeks. Hassan al-Rashid, the terrorist coordinator responsible for planning attacks that had killed hundreds of innocent people. "Wind conditions?" she asked, beginning her final preparations. "Surface wind still calm," Campbell reported. "But I'm seeing some thermal activity in the valley. Estimate 3 to 5 knots variable." Maya absorbed the information, making microscopic adjustments to her scope to account for the estimated wind drift. At this range, a small error in wind calculation could result in a miss by several meters. "Target stationary," Wilson reported. "He's positioned at the front edge of the balcony, clear shot." Maya found her natural respiratory pause, her finger finding the trigger's sweet spot. The crosshairs settled on the distant figure, barely visible even through the powerful scope. 3,847 meters, nearly 2.5 miles. A shot that would either make history or simply add to the list of impossible attempts. "Send it," Wilson whispered. Maya began her trigger squeeze slow, steady, straight back. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with its familiar thunder, and the custom bullet began its journey across the valley, carrying with it months of planning and the hopes of everyone who had worked to make this moment possible. For 6 eternal seconds, the world held its breath. Then faintly but unmistakably came the sound of impact. "Target down," Wilson shouted. "Holy shit, target down." "Confirmed. Kill." Through her scope, Maya could see the balcony was now empty, except for 2 figures kneeling beside a motionless form in white robes. At 3,847 meters, farther than anyone had ever successfully engaged a target with a rifle, Hassan al-Rashid was dead. "Outstanding shot." Morrison's voice came through the radio, filled with professional admiration. "Absolutely outstanding. Pack it up, people were getting out of here." Maya cleared her rifle and began breaking down her equipment, her hands moving automatically while her mind processed what had just happened. She had just made the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history, a shot that pushed the very boundaries of what was possible with current technology. "How does it feel?" Wilson asked as they prepared for extraction. Maya considered the question as she packed her rifle case. "Like I did my job," she said finally. "Nothing more, nothing less." But as the extraction helicopter approached and she prepared to leave the mountains of Afghanistan behind, Maya knew that this morning had changed everything. She had proven that the impossible was simply another challenge waiting to be overcome. By skill, preparation, and the courage to take the shot when it mattered most. 6 months later, Maya stood in the same briefing room at Fort Bragg where this journey had begun, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Gone was the skepticism and barely concealed hostility she'd faced on her first day. In its place was something she'd never experienced before: genuine respect from some of the most elite soldiers in the world. Colonel Hartwell stood at the front of the room, addressing a gathering that included not only the Delta Force operators who had supported her mission, but also senior officers from multiple special operations units and several civilians whose presence spoke to the broader implications of what had been accomplished. The success of Operation Silent Thunder, Hartwell said, represents more than just the elimination of a high-value target. It represents a fundamental shift in how we think about precision engagement at extreme ranges. Maya sat quietly in the front row, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. The 3,847-meter shot had reverberated through the military community like a seismic event, forcing a re-evaluation of what was possible in modern warfare. Sergeant Chen's achievement, Hartwell continued, has already led to changes in training, protocols, equipment procurement, and tactical doctrine across multiple services. But more importantly, it has demonstrated that the limits we accept are often limits we impose on ourselves. After the briefing, Maya found herself surrounded by people wanting to discuss technical details, request training assistance, or simply shake the hand of the person who had redefined the possible. She handled the attention with characteristic professionalism, but privately longed for the simplicity of her earlier career when success was measured in private satisfaction rather than public recognition. "Shun," Morrison called out as the crowd began to disperse. "Got a minute?" Maya excused herself from a conversation with a weapons developer and joined Morrison in a quieter corner of the room. The big sergeant wore an expression she'd learned to recognize the look of someone with something important to say. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "Not just for that first day on the range, but for every assumption I made about you before I saw what you could do." Maya studied his face, seeing genuine regret there. "No apology necessary, Sergeant. You weren't the first, and you won't be. The last, maybe not," Morrison replied, "but that doesn't make it right. And I want you to know having you on that mission made all the difference. Not just the shot, but the way you handled the pressure, the professionalism, the way you never let our doubts affect your confidence." "Thank you," Maya said simply. "That means more than you know." Rodriguez approached, interrupting their conversation with his characteristic grin. "Sorry to break up the Mutual Admiration Society, but there's someone who wants to meet our record-breaking sniper." He gestured toward an older man in civilian clothes, who had been observing from across the room. Maya recognized him from photos. General Mitchell, the commanding officer of Joint Special Operations Command, a man whose opinion carried enormous weight in the special operations community. "Sergeant Chen," General Mitchell said as he approached, extending his hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. That was extraordinary work in Afghanistan." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, shaking his hand. "I had excellent support from the team." "Indeed you did. But let's not minimize what you accomplished. A 3,847-meter shot, under operational conditions, is something that will be studied and admired for decades to come." Mitchell paused, studying her face. "The question now is what comes next." Maya felt a familiar tightness in her stomach. In her experience, conversations with generals about what comes next rarely led anywhere she wanted to go. "Sir," she said, "we're establishing a new training program," Mitchell explained. "Advanced long-range marksmanship, designed to push the boundaries of what's possible in precision engagement. We need someone to lead it, someone with the technical knowledge, the teaching ability, and the credibility that comes from actually having done what everyone else just talks about." Maya considered the offer, understanding both its significance and its implications. Leading a training program would mean more responsibility, higher visibility, and the challenge of passing on skills that she'd spent years developing. Where would this program be based? She asked. "Here at Bragg initially, but with training rotations to Colorado, Alaska, and other locations that provide the environmental challenges necessary for extreme range work," Mitchell smiled. "Think of it as taking what you learned in Afghanistan and making sure the next generation of snipers can do even better." "Can I think about it, sir?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." Mitchell handed her his card. But Chen, understand that what you've accomplished has changed things. The enemy knows we can reach out and touch them at distances they thought. We're safe. They're going to adapt, which means we need to stay ahead of them. After Mitchell left, Maya found herself alone with Wilson, who had been listening to the conversation with interest. "What do you think?" he asked. Maya looked around the briefing room, noting the tactical displays and maps that spoke of ongoing operations around the world. "I think," she said slowly, "that I never intended to become famous for shooting people at impossible distances." "But you did," Wilson pointed out. "And now you have to decide what to do with that fame." Maya nodded, understanding the truth in his words. The 3,847-meter shot had made her something she'd never wanted to be, a symbol, a legend, a person whose achievements would be measured against by every sniper who came after her. "You know what the strangest part is," she said. "That morning on the range when I made that 3,000-meter shot, I was just trying to prove I belonged. I never imagined it would lead to this." Wilson smiled. "Maybe that's what made the difference. You weren't trying to be a hero or set records. You were just doing your job, better than anyone else could do it." As Maya prepared to leave Fort Bragg, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been just another experienced sniper, skilled but unknown. Now she was being asked to help shape the future of precision, marksmanship for the entire Special Operations community, the Delta Force operators who had once doubted. Her abilities now spoke of her with something approaching reverence. The 3,000-meter demonstration that had started, everything was now remembered as just a warm-up for what was to come. And somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, a shot fired across 3,847 meters of thin air had changed the tactical landscape. Forever, Maya climbed into her vehicle and began the drive away from Fort Bragg, knowing that she would be back soon to give General Mitchell her answer. She already knew what that answer would be. She would take the position, not because she wanted the responsibility, but because she understood that some opportunities to make a difference come only once in a lifetime. As she drove through the North Carolina countryside, Maya thought about her grandmother's farm in Montana, where she had first learned that if you're going to kill something, you better make it count the first time. That lesson had carried her through years of military service, multiple combat deployments, and finally to a mountainside in Afghanistan, where she had pushed the boundaries of human capability. Now, she had the chance to pass that lesson on to others, to ensure that the next generation of snipers would be even better prepared for the challenges they would face. It was a responsibility she had never sought, but one she was uniquely qualified to fulfill. Behind her, Fort Bragg disappeared in the rearview mirror. Ahead lay a future she could never have imagined 6 months ago, when a group of Delta Force operators had bet she couldn't hit water, and then watched her blow out a match at 3,000 meters. Some bets, Maya reflected, changed everything. 2 years after the shot that changed everything, the Advanced Long-Range Marksmanship program had become one of the most sought-after assignments in the Special Operations community. Students came from every branch of service and several allied nations, all hoping to learn from the woman who had redefined the possible. Maya stood on the familiar concrete firing platform in Colorado, watching as her latest class of students attempted shots at 2,500 meters, a distance that would have been considered extreme just a few years earlier, but which now represented standard training for advanced snipers. "Remember," she called out to the students, "consistency is everything. Perfect shots are nice, but consistent shots save lives." The words had become her signature phrase, repeated in training facilities around the world and passed down from instructor to student, like a sacred text of precision marksmanship. Behind her, a new record board tracked the achievements of program graduates. Multiple confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, tactical successes that had prevented terrorist attacks, and a growing reputation for precision that had enemies around the world reconsidering their assumptions. about safe distances, but for Maya, the most satisfying entry on that board was the simplest. Student graduation rate, 94%. She had learned that her greatest achievement wasn't the 3,847-meter shot that had made her famous. It was the hundreds of students who had learned from her experience and gone on to serve with distinction. Wilson approached from the range control booth, carrying the familiar tablet that tracked student progress and performance statistics. "How's the new class looking?" Maya asked. "Promising," Wilson replied. He had requested transfer to the program after Maya had taken command, becoming her senior instructor and closest advisor. "We've got a Marine who's consistently hitting at 2,200 meters, and an Army sergeant who shows real potential for extreme range work." Maya nodded, watching as one of her students chambered another round and prepared for a shot at maximum training range. "What about the new equipment? Arriving next week. The latest generation of rifles and optics, plus those experimental bullets the lab has been working on." Wilson paused. "Word is they might extend effective range by another 300 meters. Maya smiled at the thought. When she had made her record-setting shot, 3,847 meters had seemed like the absolute limit of what was possible. Now, less than 3 years later, technology and technique were pushing that boundary even further. "Chen," Wilson said, his tone becoming more serious, "got a call from the Pentagon this morning. They want to discuss your next assignment." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that came with talk of reassignment. She had built something here, created a program that was making a real difference in military capability and saving lives in the field. What kind of assignment? Classified, but the caller mentioned emerging threats and advanced capabilities. Wilson studied her face. "You interested?" Maya looked out across the valley where her students were still working, pushing themselves to achieve what their instructors had proved was possible. This program would continue without her. She had built it too well for her departure to destroy what had been created. "Maybe," she said finally, "but only if they understand that some things are more important than records or headlines." Wilson smiled, recognizing the philosophy that had made Maya not just an exceptional shooter, but an exceptional teacher. "I'll let them know." As the afternoon training session concluded and her students began cleaning their weapons and recording their performance data, Maya remained on the firing platform, looking out at the distant targets that marked the boundaries of human capability. Somewhere in the world, threats were developing that would require the skills her students were learning. Enemies were adapting to the new reality of precision fire at extreme range, developing countermeasures and tactics designed to defeat the capabilities she had helped create. The cycle would continue. New challenges would demand new solutions. New technology would enable new possibilities, and somewhere, a young sniper would push the boundaries even further than she had dared to imagine. Maya picked up her rifle case and began the walk back to the main facility, knowing that whatever came next, she had already achieved something that would outlast any individual record or personal achievement. She had proven that limits existed primarily in the mind, and that with enough skill, preparation, and courage, even the impossible could become routine. Behind her, the targets waited patiently for the next group of students who would attempt to reach them across distances that continued to challenge the very definition of what a rifle could accomplish. And in training facilities around the world, instructors repeated the lesson Maya had learned on her grandmother's farm in Montana. If you're going to take the shot, make it count the first time. The rest was just mathematics. 3 months after Maya had been approached about her next assignment, she found herself in a sterile briefing room deep within the Pentagon, surrounded by officials whose security clearances were so high their names didn't appear on any public roster. The atmosphere was different from her previous military briefings, heavier, weighted with implications that extended far beyond conventional warfare. General Mitchell sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by representatives from the CIA, NSA, and several other agencies whose acronyms Maya recognized, but whose functions remained largely mysterious to her. On the large display screen at the front of the room, satellite imagery showed what appeared to be a remote facility in the mountains of Central Asia. "What you're about to see," Mitchell began, "represents a new category of threat that conventional military responses have proven inadequate to address." The satellite image zoomed in, revealing a complex of buildings that seemed to blend seamlessly into the mountainous terrain. Maya's trained eye immediately noted the defensive positions, the carefully concealed access routes, and the sophisticated camouflage that would make the facility nearly invisible to casual observation. "This facility," continued Dr. Rebecca Hayes, a CIA analyst whose presence spoke to the intelligence community's deep involvement in whatever was being planned, "is where Viktor Kozlov has been developing what our sources describe as next-generation asymmetric warfare capabilities." Maya recognized the name from intelligence briefings. Kozlov was a former Russian Spetsnaz operator turned arms dealer, known for supplying advanced weapons to terrorist organizations and rogue states. His disappearance from the international scene 2 years earlier had been noted, but not deeply investigated. "What kind of capabilities?" Maya asked. Dr. Hayes activated a new display showing technical diagrams that made Maya's blood run cold. "Portable directed energy weapons. Laser systems capable of disabling aircraft at ranges up to 10 kilometers. If these weapons reach the wrong hands, they could neutralize our air superiority advantage in multiple theaters simultaneously." The implications were staggering. American military dominance relied heavily on air power and advanced technology. Weapons that could blind satellites, disable aircraft, or disrupt communications would fundamentally alter the balance of power. In any conflict, where does this facility stand in terms of operational capability? Maya asked, studying the satellite imagery with the eye of someone who had spent years identifying targets and assessing threats. "Intelligence suggests they're approximately 6 weeks from completing the first production models," replied Colonel James Morrison, not the Delta Force Morrison she knew, but a different officer entirely, this one bearing the insignia of military intelligence. "Our window for action is extremely limited." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that came with high-stakes operations. "What kind of action are we discussing?" General Mitchell leaned forward, his expression grave. "Direct assault is not feasible. The facility is too well defended, too remote, and too likely to result in the destruction of critical intelligence we need to recover. Airstrikes would face the same problems, with the added risk of collateral damage to nearby civilian populations. So we're back to precision engagement," Maya said, understanding where the conversation was headed. "We're back to precision engagement," Mitchell confirmed. "But this time, the challenges are unprecedented." The display changed to show a topographical map that made Maya's previous mission in Afghanistan look simple by comparison. The target facility sat in a valley surrounded by peaks that rose over 4,000 meters, accessible only through a narrow canyon that would be heavily guarded and easily defended. "The only viable shooting position," Dr. Hayes explained, "is located here." She pointed to a peak that appeared to be impossibly distant from the target. "Range to target, 4,387 meters." Maya stared at the numbers, feeling the weight of what was being asked. Her record-setting shot in Afghanistan had been 3,847 meters under challenging but manageable conditions. This would require her to exceed that distance by over 500 meters in terrain that appeared even more unforgiving. "What's the target?" she asked quietly. "Viktor Kozlov himself," General Mitchell replied. "Intelligence indicates he personally oversees the final stages of weapons testing. We'll have a narrow window when he's exposed, and eliminating him will disrupt the program long enough for follow-up operations to secure the facility." Maya studied the tactical display, her mind automatically running calculations that seemed to defy the laws of physics. At 4,387 meters, bullet drop would exceed 1,400 feet. Wind drift could push the projectile dozens of feet off target. The shot would require nearly 7 seconds of flight time, during which any number of factors could cause a miss. "Has anyone ever attempted a shot at this range?" she asked. "No," Dr. Hayes admitted. "According to our ballistics experts, 4,387 meters represents the theoretical maximum range for current rifle technology under perfect conditions. Under field conditions, with the environmental challenges of that terrain." She didn't finish the sentence. Maya looked around the room, noting the expressions of the assembled officials. These were people accustomed to dealing with impossible situations, but even they seemed daunted by what they were proposing. "When?" she asked. "Intelligence suggests Kozlov will be at the facility for weapons testing in 10 days, General Mitchell replied. "After that, our sources indicate he'll disappear again, possibly for months. 10 days to prepare for a shot that pushed beyond the limits of human capability." Maya felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that came with truly challenging missions, but this time the fear was stronger than it had ever been before. "I'll need to see the rifle," she said finally. General Mitchell smiled grimly. "We were hoping you'd say that." They moved to an adjacent room that had been converted into a temporary armory. On a single table sat what was clearly the most advanced sniper rifle ever constructed, a weapon that bore only passing resemblance to anything Maya had used before. "Custom built by the best weapons engineers in the country," explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, the civilian ballistics expert who had worked with Maya in Colorado. "Extended barrel, experimental propellants, bullets designed specifically for extreme range work. This rifle represents the absolute pinnacle of current technology." Maya lifted the weapon, immediately noting its weight and balance. Everything about it spoke of precision engineering taken to extremes. The stock was adjustable in dozens of ways. The trigger was a work of art, and the scope was clearly a custom piece that probably cost more than most people's cars. "What's the effective range?" she asked. "In laboratory conditions, we've achieved consistent accuracy out to 4,500 meters, Martinez replied. "But laboratory conditions and mountain warfare are very different things." Maya nodded, understanding the challenges that lay ahead. "I'll need 2 weeks minimum to work up firing solutions and practice at maximum range." "You'll have it," General Mitchell assured her. "We're reopening the Colorado facility exclusively for your use, with unlimited ammunition and whatever support you need." As the briefing concluded and the officials began filing out, Maya remained behind with the rifle, running her hands over its surfaces and trying to imagine the shot that would be required. 4,387 meters, nearly 3 miles. A distance that challenged not just her skills, but the fundamental limits of what was possible with small arms fire. "Intelligence indicates he personally observes all weapons testing from a specific balcony on the main facility," Wilson replied. "Usually for periods of 30 to 45 minutes, roughly twice per day. We'll have narrow windows of opportunity." Maya nodded, understanding that she would likely have only 1 or 2 chances to make the shot that mattered. Miss the first attempt, and Kozlov would almost certainly take cover, eliminating any possibility of a second try. The next 3 days passed in intensive preparation. Maya fired hundreds of rounds at maximum range, gradually improving her hit rate to roughly 30% under ideal conditions. She studied meteorological patterns, memorized every detail of the target facility, and worked with Martinez to fine-tune the rifle's performance. On the final day before deployment, she achieved something that had seemed impossible just a week earlier: 5 consecutive hits at 4,387 meters. The shots weren't perfect, but they were all within the lethal zone. demonstrating that consistent accuracy at that range was achievable under the right conditions. "How do you feel about the mission?" Martinez asked as Maya packed her equipment. For transport to the staging area, Maya considered the question as she secured the revolutionary rifle in its custom case. "Scared," she admitted, "but ready. This shot will either work or it won't, but I know I've done everything possible to prepare for it." "The rifle's performing better than we hoped," Martinez said. "And your shooting at maximum range has exceeded every expectation. If anyone can make this shot, it's you." As Maya prepared to leave Colorado for what might be the most challenging mission of her career, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From proving herself on a Fort Bragg range to attempting shots that pushed the very limits of human capability, she had consistently found ways to exceed what others thought possible. Now she faced the ultimate test: a shot across nearly 3 miles of mountain air, using experimental technology to eliminate a threat that could change the nature of warfare itself. The mathematics were daunting, the conditions would be challenging, and the consequences of failure were enormous. But as Maya loaded her equipment into the transport vehicle, she felt the familiar calm that came with accepting a challenge that would test everything she had learned over years of pushing boundaries. Somewhere in the mountains of Central Asia, Viktor Kozlov was developing weapons that could kill thousands of innocent people. And somewhere in those same mountains, Maya would soon discover whether the impossible was simply another limit waiting to be exceeded. The insertion into Central Asia proceeded flawlessly, with Maya and her support team establishing their position on a wind-swept peak at 4,100 meters elevation, just as the sun began to rise over the surrounding mountains. The target facility lay nearly 3 miles away across a valley that seemed to stretch into infinity, barely visible even through the most powerful optics. Maya methodically assembled her rifle in the protected firing position that the advance team had prepared, each component fitting together with the precision of a Swiss watch. The revolutionary weapon felt familiar in her hands now, after weeks of intensive training, but she knew that familiarity was no guarantee of success at this unprecedented range. Target bearing 127 degrees, range 4,387 meters confirmed, reported Sergeant Johnson, the team's forward observer, settling in beside her with advanced spotting equipment. "Facility appears quiet, but thermal imaging shows multiple personnel signatures inside the main building." Maya began her environmental assessment, noting wind conditions, temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure. At nearly 3 miles, her bullet would pass through multiple weather systems, each potentially affecting its trajectory in ways that were difficult to predict. "Surface wind here is calm, maybe 3 knots from the northwest," reported Corporal Davis, the team's meteorological specialist. "But we're seeing some thermal activity in the valley that could create variable conditions downrange." Maya nodded, understanding the challenges. At 4,387 meters, she would be shooting at the absolute edge of what physics would allow. Wind conditions that seemed negligible near her position could push the bullet several feet off target by the time it reached the objective. She spent the next 2 hours setting up her equipment and running preliminary calculations. The mathematics were as daunting as she remembered from training: 1,427 feet of bullet drop, 22 inches of Coriolis drift, and environmental factors that could change everything in the 6.8 seconds it would take her bullet to reach the target. Movement in the facility, Johnson reported from his observation position. "Multiple vehicles arriving. Looks like they're preparing for some kind of demonstration." Maya switched to her spotting scope, scanning the distant facility for signs of her target. Through the powerful optics, she could see figures moving around the main building. But at nearly 3 miles distance, individual identification was impossible without thermal imaging. Thermal signature analysis confirms multiple high-value individuals entering the main building, Davis reported. But we won't have positive target identification until someone appears on the observation balcony. Maya settled behind her rifle, adjusting the bipod and getting comfortable in her final firing position. Her breathing was controlled, her heart rate steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. This was what she had trained for the moment, when months of preparation would be tested by a single shot across an impossible distance. "Activity on the balcony," Johnson announced. "2 individuals, make that 3. Can't confirm identity at this range." Maya swung her scope toward the balcony, a platform that appeared no larger than a postage stamp through her optics. The figures were barely visible, mere shadows against the distant mountainside. "Wait," Johnson said, his voice tightening with concentration. "Thermal imaging confirms target identity. Viktor Kozlov on the balcony, wearing dark clothing, positioned at the front rail." Maya found her target through the scope, a figure who matched the photograph she had studied for weeks. At 4,387 meters, he was barely more than a speck, but she could make out enough detail to confirm the identification. "Wind conditions?" she asked, beginning her final preparations. "Surface wind still calm," Davis reported. "But weather modeling shows possible thermal activity in the valley. Estimate variable winds of 5 to 8 knots at different altitudes." Maya absorbed the information, making microscopic adjustments to her scope to account for the estimated environmental factors. At this range, a small error in calculation could result in a miss by dozens of feet. "Target appears stationary," Johnson reported. "He's positioned at the front of the balcony, clear line of sight." Maya found her natural respiratory pause, her finger locating the trigger's critical point. The crosshairs settled on the distant figure, barely visible even through the revolutionary scope system. 4,387 meters. Nearly 3 miles. A shot that would either make history or simply demonstrate the limits of human capability. The morning conditions seemed as perfect as they were likely to get. Wind was minimal, temperature was stable, and visibility was excellent. If she was going to make this shot, now was the time. "Send it," Johnson whispered. Maya began her trigger squeeze, slow, steady, straight back. The rifle thundered against her shoulder, sending the experimental bullet on its journey across the valley. For a moment, she maintained her sight picture, watching through the scope as if she could somehow guide the projectile to its target. 6.8 seconds had never seemed so long. The bullet arced through the thin mountain air, climbing to a maximum height of over 700 feet before gravity began pulling it back toward Earth. It passed through multiple wind layers, each potentially altering its course by inches or feet. Temperature variations affected its velocity, while air pressure changes modified its trajectory in ways too complex for even advanced computers to predict perfectly. At 3,000 meters downrange, the bullet was still climbing, pushed upward by the tremendous muzzle velocity of the experimental rifle. At 4,000 meters, it began its final descent, now moving in a ballistic arc that would either intersect with the target or impact harmlessly in the mountainside. Beyond at 4,387 meters, after 6.8 seconds of flight through some of the most challenging atmospheric conditions on Earth, the bullet reached its destination. Maya saw the impact through her scope, a small puff of dust and debris, as the high-velocity projectile struck stone near the balcony. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought she had missed entirely. Then Johnson's voice cut through the mountain air. "Target down. I repeat, target down. Confirmed elimination." Through her scope, Maya could see the balcony was now empty except for figures kneeling beside a motionless form. At 4,387 meters, farther than anyone had ever successfully engaged a human target, Viktor Kozlov was dead. "Outstanding shot," came a voice through her radio headset. "Absolutely outstanding. Pack it up. People were getting out of here." Maya cleared her rifle and began breaking down her equipment. her hands moving automatically while her mind processed what had just happened. She had just shattered her own world record, making a shot that pushed beyond the theoretical limits of rifle technology. "How does it feel?" Johnson asked as they prepared for extraction. Maya considered the question as she packed the revolutionary rifle in its case. "Like I did something that shouldn't have been possible," she said finally, "but was absolutely necessary." The extraction proceeded smoothly, with the team reaching their pickup point without incident. As the helicopter lifted off and began the journey back to friendly territory, Maya looked down at the mountains where she had just redefined the limits of precision. Marksmanship. 4,387 meters. The number would be studied by ballistics experts for decades, analyzed by military tacticians around the world, and remembered as the moment when the impossible became achievable through skill, technology, and the courage to attempt what had never been done before. But for Maya, the most important number was different: 0. 0 American casualties in the operation that had eliminated a threat capable of killing thousands of innocent people. 0 friendly lives lost because precision had succeeded where conventional force would have failed. As the helicopter disappeared into the vast expanse of Central Asian sky, Maya reflected on the shot that had just changed everything again. Somewhere in the mountains below, the facility that had been developing next-generation weapons was now in chaos, its leadership eliminated and its programs disrupted. The impossible shot had become possible, not through luck or accident, but through the relentless pursuit of perfection in the art of precision marksmanship. And in military training facilities around the world, a new generation of snipers would soon be learning that the limits they accepted were often limits they imposed on themselves. 6 months after the Central Asia operation, Maya found herself standing before a joint session of Congress, preparing to receive the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States. The citation would read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." But Maya knew the real story was more complex than any citation could capture. The ceremony was close to the press, classified, at levels that meant most details would never be publicly acknowledged. But in the military community, word of the 4,387-meter shot had spread like wildfire, cementing Maya's reputation as the most accomplished precision marksman in history. "Sergeant Chen," the president said as he placed the medal around her neck, "your actions prevented the proliferation of weapons that could have fundamentally altered the balance of global security. The nation owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Maya stood at attention, uncomfortable with the ceremony, but understanding its importance. The elimination of Viktor Kozlov had indeed prevented a new category of weapons from reaching terrorist organizations and rogue states. Intelligence recovered from the facility had revealed plans for attacks that would have killed thousands of innocent people. After the ceremony, Maya found herself in a private briefing room with senior officials from across the national security establishment. The questions were technical, focused on the methods and equipment that had made the impossible shot achievable. "The rifle technology we developed for this mission," explained Dr. Martinez, who had been brought in to brief the officials, "represents a quantum leap in precision engineering. But technology is only as good as the person using it." General Mitchell, now wearing an additional star on his uniform, addressed the room. "Sergeant Chen's achievement has implications that extend far beyond a single operation. We're looking at fundamental changes in how we approach precision engagement across multiple theaters." Maya listened as the discussion turned to broader strategic implications. Her shot had demonstrated that virtually no target was beyond the reach of American precision, fundamentally altering the calculations of enemies around the world. "What concerns me," said a representative from the State Department, "is proliferation. If we can develop this capability, others will attempt to match it. We need to think about the long-term implications." The comments sparked a lengthy discussion about arms control, technology transfer, and the challenges of maintaining technological superiority in an increasingly connected world. Maya found herself drawn into the conversation, her practical experience providing valuable perspective on theoretical discussions. From an operational standpoint, she said, this level of precision requires not just advanced equipment, but years of training and ideal conditions. It's not something that can be easily replicated or mass-produced. But it can be replicated? Pressed the State Department official. Maya nodded reluctantly. With sufficient resources, training, and the right conditions, yes. What we achieved in Central Asia could theoretically be repeated by others with similar capabilities. The discussion continued for over an hour, covering everything from training requirements to equipment specifications to strategic implications. Maya provided input where requested, but mostly listened as policymakers grappled with the consequences of capabilities that had seemed like science fiction. Just months earlier, after the briefing, Maya walked through the corridors of the Pentagon with General Mitchell, discussing her future assignments and the evolving nature of her role in the Special Operations community. You've become something you never intended to be, Mitchell observed. A strategic asset whose capabilities have to be considered at the highest levels of military planning. Maya considered his words. I never wanted to be famous for killing people at impossible distances. But you've proven that impossible distances don't exist, Mitchell replied. And that changes everything about how we think about precision engagement. They paused at a window overlooking the Potomac River, watching civilian traffic move across the bridges that connected Washington to Virginia. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the threats that had been prevented and the boundaries that had been pushed to protect them. What comes next? Maya asked. That depends on you, Mitchell said. We could assign you to operational missions, using your capabilities against high-value targets around the world. Or we could expand your training role, building a cadre of snipers capable of extreme range precision. Maya thought about the options, weighing her desire for continued operational work against the broader impact she could have through teaching and program development. Both, she said finally. I want to continue operational work, but I also want to make sure others can do what I've done. The threats we face are evolving too quickly for any one person to handle alone. Mitchell smiled. I was hoping you'd say that we're establishing a new command structure, advanced precision engagement operations. You'd lead both operational and training components, with resources and authority to push the boundaries even further. The offer represented a level of responsibility Maya had never imagined when she first arrived at Fort Bragg to prove herself among Delta Force operators. From an unknown sniper trying to earn respect, she had become someone whose capabilities influenced national strategy. When do I start? She asked. Tomorrow, if you're ready. We've already identified several high-value targets that conventional approaches can't reach, and the training program has a waiting list of students from every special operations unit in the military. As Maya prepared to leave the Pentagon, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a Montana farm to the highest levels of military planning. Each impossible shot had led to greater challenges. Each success had raised the bar for what might be attempted next. The 4,387-meter shot in Central Asia had proven that with the right combination of skill, technology, and determination, virtually any target could be reached. But it had also demonstrated that such capabilities came with enormous responsibility and far-reaching consequences. Walking through the corridors, where some of the most important decisions in American military history had been made, Maya understood that her role had evolved beyond that of a simple sniper. She had become a strategic asset, a capability that enemies feared and allies relied upon. But at its core, her mission remained the same as it had been on her grandmother's farm in Montana. If you're going to take the shot, make it count the first time. The distance might have changed, the stakes might have grown, and the technology might have evolved, But the fundamental principle remained constant: precision, preparation, and the courage to attempt what others considered impossible. These were the tools that had carried her from initial skepticism to the highest honors the nation could bestow, and in training facilities around the world. A new generation of precision marksmen was learning that the only real limits were those they imposed on themselves. 2 years after establishing advanced precision engagement operations, Maya stood before her latest class of students at the expanded Colorado facility, watching as they attempted shots that would have been considered fantasy just a decade earlier. The program had evolved into the most sophisticated sniper training operation in military history, with students coming from dozens of countries and every branch of service. "Remember," she called out to the students positioned at the 3,500-meter firing line. "At extreme range, perfect is the enemy of good. Consistent, repeatable accuracy beats occasional perfection every time." Her words carried the weight of experience earned through shots that had redefined what was possible with rifle technology. The students listened with the attention reserved for someone who had not just theorized about impossible distances, but had actually achieved them under combat conditions. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, no relation to the Delta Force operator Maya had first met, was attempting her qualification shot at 3,800 meters. A distance that exceeded the old world record, but now represented standard proficiency for advanced precision engagement graduates. "Wind conditions?" Maya asked, settling in beside Rodriguez with a spotting scope. "Surface wind calm, estimate 4 knots, variable at mid-range based on flag movement," Rodriguez replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the shot she was attempting. Maya nodded approvingly. Wind reading at extreme range had become as much art as science, requiring students to interpret atmospheric conditions across distances that could encompass multiple weather systems. Rodriguez fired, the custom rifle's report echoing across the valley. Maya tracked the bullet's flight through her spotting scope, watching as it arced across nearly 2.5 miles of mountain air. "Hit, center mass," Maya announced as the distant target rang with impact. "Outstanding shooting, Sergeant. You're officially qualified for extreme range operations." Around the firing line, other students continued their own qualification attempts. The program had graduated over 200 precision marksmen, each capable of engaging targets at distances that had been impossible just years earlier. Their skills had been tested in operations around the world, preventing terrorist attacks, eliminating high-value targets, and demonstrating American precision capabilities to enemies who thought they were safe at any distance. "Ma'am," called out Captain Wilson, a different Wilson than the Delta Force sergeant who had become Maya's first supporter, but carrying the same dedication to precision marksmanship. "We've got movement on the 4,500-meter target." Maya turned her attention to the extreme range firing position, where Master Sergeant Thomas Chun, no relation, despite the shared surname, was preparing to attempt the longest shot in the program's curriculum. At 4,500 meters, he would be exceeding even Maya's record-setting achievement in Central Asia. "Conditions?" Maya asked, moving to the ultra-long-range position. "Variable winds up to 6 knots, temperature stable, humidity optimal," reported the weather station operator. "About as good as we're going to get for this distance." Maya settled in beside Chun, whose preparation had been methodical and thorough. He had been training for this shot for 8 months, gradually working up to maximum range while mastering the environmental factors that could make or break precision at such distances. "How do you feel?" Maya asked. "Ready," Chun replied simply. Maya observed as Chun began his final preparations, checking and rechecking every detail that could affect a shot at the absolute limit of current technology. His movements were precise, methodical, the result of months of training under Maya's personal supervision. The rifle he was using represented the latest evolution in extreme range technology, incorporating lessons learned from Maya's record-setting shots and advances in materials science that pushed the boundaries even further. At 4,500 meters, he would be attempting something that challenged not just human skill, but the fundamental laws of physics. Winds picking up slightly, reported the meteorological station. Estimate 6 to 8 knots variable, multiple directions. Chen absorbed the information, making minute adjustments to his scope settings. At this range, even small errors in wind calculation could result in misses measured in dozens of feet. Maya watched through her spotting scope as Chen settled into his final firing position. She had made this same shot during the development of current training protocols, but it never became routine. Each attempt at 4,500 meters was a test of everything that extreme-range precision marksmanship had learned. "Send it when ready," Maya said quietly. Chen controlled his breathing, finding his natural respiratory pause. His finger found the trigger's sweet spot, and he began the slow, steady squeeze that would send the bullet on its 7-second journey across nearly 3 miles of mountain air. The rifle's report was tremendous, echoing off the surrounding peaks. As the experimental bullet began its ballistic arc, Maya tracked its flight through her spotting scope, knowing that at this distance, the projectile would climb to over 800 feet above the target before gravity brought it back down. 7 seconds passed in absolute silence. Then, faintly but unmistakably, came the metallic ring of a bullet striking steel. "Hit!" Maya called out, her voice carrying genuine excitement. "Outstanding shot, Sergeant Chen. New program record." The firing line erupted in applause as students and instructors acknowledged what they had just witnessed. Chen had not only succeeded at 4,500 meters, but had done so under training conditions that closely simulated operational requirements. As the excitement settled and Chen began breaking down his equipment, Maya reflected on how far the program had evolved. What had started as an attempt to validate her own extreme-range capabilities had become a comprehensive training system that was producing snipers capable of precision that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. "Ma'am," approached Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, the former Dr. Martinez, who had received a direct commission and now served as the program's chief of technical development. "We've got some interesting data from that shot." Maya reviewed the ballistic information on Martinez's tablet, noting the environmental conditions and bullet performance that had made Chen's success possible. "Remarkable consistency," Maya observed. "The new rifle design is performing even better than we projected." "It's not just the rifle," Martinez replied. "The training methodology you've developed is producing shooters who understand extreme-range precision at a level we've never seen before." Chen's hit rate at 4,500 meters during training has been over 40%. Maya nodded, understanding the significance. When she had first attempted shots at that range, success rates had been much lower. The systematic approach they had developed was not just training individual snipers, but advancing the entire science of precision marksmanship. That evening, Maya sat in her office reviewing after-action reports from recent operational deployments. Advanced precision engagement graduates had been involved in 17 classified missions over the past 6 months, with a 100% success rate and 0 friendly casualties. The missions ranged from counter-terrorism operations to strategic elimination of high-value targets, but all shared common characteristics: extreme range, challenging environmental conditions, and consequences that justified the resources invested in developing impossible capabilities. At the Han Fonquentes, knock at her door interrupted her review. She looked up to see General Mitchell, now wearing 4 stars and serving as commander of Special Operations Command. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, carrying the expression of someone with important news to share. Maya gestured to a chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you, sir?" I wanted to personally brief you on some developments that will affect your program, Mitchell said, settling into the chair. Intelligence has identified a new category of threats that will require capabilities beyond what we've developed so far. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that came with discussions of new challenges. What kind of threats? Mitchell activated a secure tablet, showing satellite imagery of what appeared to be a heavily fortified position in a remote mountain range. Advanced defensive systems that can detect and intercept incoming aircraft at ranges exceeding 50 kilometers. Ground approaches that would require weeks of infiltration through hostile territory. Maya studied the imagery, noting the defensive positions and terrain features that would make conventional assault nearly impossible. What's the target? Multiple high-value individuals from different terrorist organizations meeting to coordinate. Attacks that intelligence suggests could kill tens of thousands of innocent people. Mitchell paused. The only viable approach is precision engagement from extreme range. How extreme? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Would push beyond anything yet attempted. 5,200 meters, Mitchell replied. Under conditions that make your previous shots look simple by comparison. Maya stared at the number, feeling the weight of what was being asked. 5,200 meters over 3 miles would require pushing beyond the theoretical limits of current technology. The bullet drop alone would exceed 1,800 feet, while environmental factors could multiply unpredictably over such distances. When? She asked quietly. 6 weeks. Intelligence indicates the meeting will take place during a narrow window, after which the targets will disperse to locations where they can't be reached through any conventional means. Maya looked at the satellite imagery again, noting the defensive positions and terrain challenges that would make this the most difficult shot ever attempted. I'll need to see the rifle, Mitchell smiled grimly. We were hoping you'd say that. The technical development team has been working on something special. They moved to a secure facility where a single rifle case sat on a steel table. Maya opened it carefully, revealing what was clearly the most advanced sniper rifle ever constructed, a weapon that incorporated technologies she couldn't immediately identify. Experimental everything, Martinez explained, appearing from an adjacent room. Extended barrel, revolutionary propellants, bullets designed with computational fluid dynamics modeling. This rifle represents the absolute pinnacle of what's currently possible. Maya lifted the weapon, immediately noting its extraordinary balance and the precision of its construction. Everything about it spoke of engineering taken to extremes that challenged the limits of materials science. Effective range? She asked. In laboratory conditions, we've achieved consistent hits out to 5,500 meters, Martinez replied. But laboratory conditions and operational environments are different universes. Maya nodded, understanding the challenges that lay ahead. I'll need 4 weeks minimum to work up firing solutions and train at maximum range. You'll have it, Mitchell assured her. Unlimited resources, whatever support you need, and a target range that will let you practice at distances no one has ever attempted. As the briefing concluded and the officials prepared to leave, Maya remained with the revolutionary rifle, studying its advanced systems and trying to imagine the shot that would be required. 5,200 meters. Over 3 miles. A distance that challenged not just her skills, but the fundamental limits of what was possible with small arms technology. Dr. Martinez approached as Maya continued her examination of the weapon. What do you think? Maya looked up from the rifle's impossibly complex scope system. I think we're about to find out whether there are any real limits to what determination and technology can achieve. Do you think it's possible? Maya considered the question carefully. 2 years ago, everyone said 4,387 meters was impossible. Before that, they said the same about 3,847 meters. Maybe impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been done yet. But you'll try? Maya met Martinez's eyes, seeing the familiar weight of expectation and responsibility. If these weapons fall into the wrong hands, how many people die? Conservative estimates suggest coordinated attacks could kill over 50,000 innocent people, including potential chemical or biological components that could multiply casualties exponentially. Maya nodded slowly, understanding the stakes involved. Then I'll try. But everyone needs to understand that at 5,200 meters, we're not just pushing the envelope, we're trying to invent a completely new one. As Maya prepared to begin the most challenging preparation of her career, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From proving herself among skeptical Delta Force operators to attempting shots that redefined the possible, each success had led to greater challenges and higher stakes. Now, she faced the ultimate test: a shot across over 3 miles of mountain air, using technology that barely existed, to prevent attacks that could kill tens of thousands of innocent people. The mathematics were staggering, the conditions would be unprecedented, and the consequences of failure were almost unimaginable. But as Maya began planning her training regimen for the most impossible shot ever attempted, she felt the familiar calm that came with accepting a challenge that would test everything she had learned about precision, preparation, and the courage to attempt what had never been done before. Somewhere in the world, terrorists were planning attacks that would kill innocent people on a scale that defied comprehension. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, Maya would spend the next month preparing to stop them with a single shot fired across a distance that challenged the very definition of what a rifle could accomplish. The impossible was about to become possible again, or they would finally discover the true limits of human capability and modern technology. The specialized facility in Nevada's high desert had been constructed specifically for Maya's preparation, featuring the longest rifle range ever built and environmental conditions that closely matched the operational area where she would attempt the 5,200-meter shot. The target at maximum range was barely a speck even through the most powerful spotting scopes, representing the absolute limit of what current optics could resolve. Maya stood at the firing position, the revolutionary rifle steady in her hands as she studied atmospheric data that boggled the mind. At 5,200 meters, her bullet would travel for over 8 seconds, climbing to a maximum altitude of nearly 1,000 feet before descending to the target area. During that time, it would pass through multiple pressure layers, wind systems, and temperature zones. Ballistic computer shows bullet drop of 1,847 feet, announced Dr. Martinez, consulting readings from sensors placed throughout the extended range. Flight time, 8.3 seconds. At this distance, even microscopic variations in environmental conditions can cause misses measured in dozens of feet. The mathematics were staggering beyond anything Maya had previously encountered. Her bullet would drop over 1,800 feet due to gravity alone. Wind drift could push it off course by enormous distances. The Coriolis effect, Earth's rotation, would deflect the projectile by over 2 feet. And all of these factors would interact in ways that challenged the most sophisticated computer modeling. What about atmospheric pressure variations? Maya asked, studying the meteorological data. Significant, Martinez replied grimly. At this range, pressure differences between your position and the target can affect bullet velocity enough to cause substantial point-of-impact shifts. Maya had been training for 3 weeks, gradually working up to maximum range while learning to read environmental conditions across distances that spanned multiple weather systems. Her hit rate at 4,800 meters was approximately 25%. At 5,000 meters, it dropped to roughly 15%. At 5,200 meters, she had yet to achieve a single hit in 37 attempts. The rifle is performing beyond specifications, Martinez observed, reviewing data from the morning shooting session. But at this range, perfect equipment isn't Enough, we're pushing against the laws of physics themselves. Maya studied her shooting log, noting patterns in her misses. Most shots were falling short or being pushed off target by wind conditions that seemed to change between the time she fired and the time the bullet reached the target area. The distances involved were so extreme that traditional shooting fundamentals had to be completely reimagined. "I need to understand the atmospheric layers better," she said. "At 5,200 meters, I'm shooting through what amounts to multiple weather systems. Conditions here might be completely different from conditions 3 miles away." Martinez activated a display showing a 3-dimensional model of the ballistic trajectory overlaid with meteorological data. "We've placed monitoring stations every 500 meters along the flight path. The data shows temperature inversions, wind shear, and pressure variations that create an incredibly complex shooting environment." Maya studied the atmospheric model, beginning to understand why traditional ballistic calculations were proving inadequate. At extreme range, shooting became an exercise in predicting weather patterns across distances that encompassed entire valleys. On the 21st day of training, something changed. Maya's 38th shot at 5,200 meters felt different as it left the rifle. The environmental conditions seemed to align perfectly, and her calculations felt more intuitive than mathematical. For 8.3 eternal seconds, the world held its breath. Then, incredibly, came the distant ring of metal striking metal. "Hit!" Martinez shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. "Holy shit, that's a hit! First successful engagement at 5,200 meters. Maya cleared the rifle and sat back, feeling a mixture of elation and relief that was almost overwhelming. It was possible. Extraordinarily difficult, requiring perfect conditions and flawless execution, but possible. "What did you do differently?" Martinez asked, reviewing environmental data from the successful shot. Maya considered the question as she prepared for another attempt. "I stopped trying to calculate everything and started feeling the shot. At this range, mathematics can only get you close. Instinct has to handle the impossible part." Her second shot at maximum range was a miss, but much closer than any previous attempt. The third was another hit, confirming that the first hadn't been pure luck. By the end of the training period, Maya was hitting approximately 30% of her shots at 5,200 meters under ideal conditions, still not reliable enough for most operational requirements, but progress that suggested the shot might be achievable under perfect circumstances. That evening, Maya sat in her quarters reviewing intelligence reports from the target area, trying to understand the environmental conditions she would face in just 1 week. The operational site was located in mountains that created complex weather patterns and atmospheric disturbances that could make her training environment look simple by comparison. Secure communication from General Mitchell interrupted her studies. His face appeared on her encrypted terminal, wearing the expression of someone delivering critical intelligence updates. "Maya," he said without preamble, "we've got developments in the target area that change our timeline. Intelligence now indicates the meeting will take place in 72 hours, not 1 week." Maya felt her stomach tighten. 72 hours meant no additional training time, no opportunity to improve her 30% hit rate at maximum range, and no chance to adapt to the specific environmental conditions of the operational area. "What's driving the timeline change?" she asked. "Intercepted communications suggest that terrorists have accelerated their planning due to intelligence leaks. If we don't act within this window, the targets will disperse and the coordinated attacks will proceed on schedule." Maya looked at her training logs, noting her recent improvement, but understanding that a 30% success rate under ideal conditions would be significantly lower under operational stress. "What's the backup plan?" Mitchell's expression grew even more serious. "Coordinated strikes by multiple special operations teams, inserted simultaneously at enormous risk. Estimated casualties are catastrophic, and the probability of preventing all planned attacks is minimal. Maya understood the implications. If she missed, dozens of elite operators would die attempting to accomplish through force what precision had failed to achieve. And even if they succeeded, thousands of innocent people would still die in terrorist attacks that couldn't be prevented through conventional means. "I'll be ready," she said simply. "Maya," Mitchell said carefully, "I need you to understand that no one expects you to attempt something this difficult. 5,200 meters under operational conditions is beyond what anyone considers achievable. If you determine the shot isn't possible, we'll proceed with alternative plans." Maya met his eyes through the secure connection. "Sir, with respect, if I don't try, people die. If I try and miss, people die. But if I try and succeed, thousands of innocent lives are saved. The mathematics on that decision are pretty clear." Mitchell nodded slowly, understanding the courage required to attempt what had never been done before. "Transport leaves in 6 hours. Godspeed, Maya." As Maya prepared her equipment for the most challenging mission of her career, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From skeptical Delta Force operators betting she couldn't hit water, to shots that consistently redefined the possible, each success had led to greater challenges and higher stakes. Now she faced the ultimate test shot across over 3 miles of mountain air, using experimental technology, under operational conditions that would test every skill she had developed over years of pushing boundaries. The target was barely visible at that distance. The environmental challenges were unprecedented, and the consequences of failure were almost unimaginable. But as Maya loaded her equipment into the transport aircraft, she felt the familiar calm that came with accepting a challenge that would determine whether human skill and modern technology had any real limits. Somewhere in the mountains ahead, terrorists were finalizing plans that would kill tens of thousands of innocent people. And somewhere in those same mountains, Maya would soon discover whether 5,200 meters was achievable, or, if she had finally found the boundary between possible and impossible, the shot that would answer that question was less than 3 days away. The pre-dawn insertion into the operational area proceeded without incident, with Maya and her support team establishing their position on a windswept ridge at 4,300 meters elevation. The target facility lay 5,200 meters away across a valley so vast it seemed to stretch beyond the horizon, barely visible even through the most advanced optics available. Maya methodically assembled the revolutionary rifle, while her team established security and communication protocols. Each component of the weapon represented the absolute pinnacle of current technology, but she knew that at 5,200 meters, even perfect equipment would be tested beyond its design limits. Target bearing 087 degrees, range confirmed at 5,200 meters. Reported Master Sergeant Johnson, settling in beside her with spotting equipment that incorporated artificial intelligence to help track targets at impossible distances. Facility shows normal activity patterns, but thermal imaging indicates preparation for a significant gathering. Maya began her environmental assessment, noting conditions that were even more challenging than her training environment. Wind patterns were complex and variable. Temperature layers created thermal distortions, and atmospheric pressure varied significantly across the enormous distance to the target. Meteorological analysis shows variable winds up to 12 knots at different altitudes, reported Specialist Martinez, monitoring weather conditions with equipment that represented a quantum leap beyond traditional instruments. We're also seeing thermal inversions that could affect bullet trajectory unpredictably. Maya nodded, understanding that she was facing environmental challenges that pushed beyond anything she had trained for. At 5,200 meters, she would be shooting through what amounted to multiple atmospheric systems, each potentially affecting her bullet's flight path in ways that were nearly impossible to predict. She spent 4 hours setting up her equipment and running preliminary calculations, using computer models that incorporated thousands of variables but still couldn't account for all the factors that would affect a bullet traveling over 3 miles through mountain air. The mathematics were beyond staggering: 1,847 feet of bullet drop, over 8 seconds of flight time, and environmental factors that multiplied exponentially over such distances. Movement in the target facility, Johnson reported as the sun climbed higher, multiple vehicles arriving, consistent with intelligence reports of the planned meeting. Maya switched to her spotting scope, scanning the distant facility for signs of activity. Through the powerful optics, she could see vehicles and personnel, but at over 3 miles distance, individual identification would be impossible until targets appeared in the specific areas where they could be engaged. Thermal imaging confirms arrival of multiple high-value individuals, Martinez reported. Pattern matches intelligence expectations for the terrorist coordination meeting. Maya settled behind her rifle, adjusting the revolutionary weapon systems for conditions that had never been encountered in training. The scope alone represented technology that pushed the boundaries of optical science, incorporating computer-assisted targeting that could compensate for some, but not all, of the variables affecting extreme range precision. "How are you feeling?" Johnson asked quietly. Maya considered the question as she continued her preparations. "Like I'm about to attempt something that defies the laws of physics," she replied honestly. "But that seems to be what I do now." The morning hours passed slowly as Maya monitored conditions and waited for her targets to appear in positions where they could be engaged. At 5,200 meters, she would have only narrow windows of opportunity when environmental conditions aligned and targets were exposed in areas where precision fire could be effective. "Target movement," Johnson announced at 13:47 hours. "Multiple individuals move in toward the main observation area. This could be our opportunity." Maya swung her scope toward the designated area, a platform that intelligence had indicated would be used for the coordination meeting's most critical discussions. Through her optics, she could see figures moving, but at over 3 miles distance, positive identification required thermal imaging and artificial intelligence analysis. "Thermal signature analysis confirms primary target," Martinez reported. High-confidence identification of the meeting's senior coordinator. Maya found her target through the scope, a figure who appeared as little more than a heat signature at this impossible distance. The revolutionary targeting system provided computational assistance, but the final shot would depend entirely on her ability to read conditions and execute precision that pushed beyond human capability. "Environmental conditions?" she asked, beginning her final preparations. "Wind variable but manageable, temperature stable, atmospheric pressure optimal for maximum range," Martinez reported. "About as good as conditions are likely to get." Maya absorbed the information, making microscopic adjustments to account for factors that were barely measurable but could mean the difference between success and failure at 5,200 meters. At this range, even perfect calculations were approximations, and success would require intuition developed through years of pushing boundaries. "Target appears stationary," Johnson reported. "Clear line of sight, optimal positioning for engagement." Maya found her natural respiratory pause, her finger locating the trigger point that would send the experimental bullet on its journey across over 3 miles of mountain air, 5,200 meters. A distance that challenged not just marksmanship, but the fundamental limits of what small arms technology could achieve. The morning conditions were as perfect as they were likely to get. Wind was manageable, visibility was excellent, and her equipment was performing flawlessly. If this shot was possible, now was the moment to attempt it. "Send it," Johnson whispered. Maya began her trigger squeeze slow, steady, straight back. The rifle thundered with tremendous force, sending the bullet on what would be either the longest successful sniper shot in history or simply another demonstration of the limits of human capability. For 8.3 seconds that seemed to last forever. The world held its breath. The bullet climbed through thin mountain air, reaching a maximum altitude of nearly 1,000 feet before gravity began pulling it back toward Earth. It passed through multiple atmospheric layers, each potentially altering its course by inches or feet. Wind systems pushed against it, temperature variations affected its velocity, and air pressure changes modified its trajectory in ways too complex for perfect prediction. At 3,000 meters downrange, the bullet was still ascending, its tremendous initial velocity carrying it through atmospheric conditions that would have stopped conventional projectiles. At 4,500 meters, it began its final descent, now following a ballistic arc that would either reach the target or impact somewhere in the vast mountainside beyond. At 5,200 meters, after traveling for 8.3 seconds through some of the most challenging atmospheric conditions on Earth, the experimental bullet reached its destination. Maya saw the impact through her scope, small disturbance near the target area that was barely visible at such distance. For a heart-stopping moment, she couldn't determine if she had hit or missed. Then Johnson's voice cut through the mountain silence. Target eliminated. Confirmed hit. Holy shit, that's impossible, but confirmed target elimination. Through her scope, Maya could see that the observation area was now in chaos, with figures responding to what had just occurred. At 5,200 meters farther than anyone had ever successfully engaged a human target, the terrorist coordinator responsible for planning attacks that would have killed tens of thousands of innocent people was dead. Outstanding shot, came a voice through her radio. Absolutely incredible. Mission successful. Begin extraction procedures. Maya cleared the rifle and began breaking down her equipment, her hands moving automatically while her mind processed what had just happened. She had not only achieved the longest sniper shot in history, but had done so under operational conditions that pushed every boundary of skill, technology, and human capability. How does it feel to rewrite the laws of physics? Johnson asked as they prepared for extraction. Maya considered the question as she packed the revolutionary rifle that had made the impossible shot achievable. Like I finally found out where the real limits are, she said quietly. And they're a lot further away than anyone imagined. The extraction proceeded smoothly, with intelligence reports confirming that the elimination of the coordination meeting's leader had disrupted terrorist planning sufficiently to prevent the coordinated attacks. Thousands of innocent lives had been saved by a single shot fired across a distance that redefined what was possible with precision marksmanship. As the helicopter lifted off and began the journey back to friendly territory, Maya looked down at the mountains where she had just pushed human capability to its absolute limits, 5,200 meters. The number would be studied by ballistics experts for generations, analyzed by military planners around the world, and remembered as the moment when impossible became just another challenge to be overcome. But for Maya, the most important measurement was different. Zero. Zero successful terrorist attacks, 0 American casualties in the operation. 0 innocent lives lost, because precision had succeeded where conventional force would have required enormous sacrifice. The shot across 5,200 meters had proven that with sufficient skill, advanced technology, and the courage to attempt what had never been done before, even the most impossible distances could be bridged by human determination and precision marksmanship. And in training facilities around the world, a new generation of snipers would soon be learning that the only real limits were those they chose to accept.